Ladies and gentlemen, leading beyond traditions, disruptive leadership for the future of higher education. Rosabeth Moss Cantor, American sociologist and professor at the Harvard Business School, once said, "Disruptive leaders see what others do not and have the courage to act on it." Today, it's all about challenging the status quo. This is the third of the AKEPT's Let's Talk About webinar series. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Greetings wherever you are in the world. Today's webinar is brought to you by AKEPT, the Higher Education Leadership Academy Malaysia, USIM University Science Islam Malaysia, Simeo Raihead Regional Center for Higher Education and Development under the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization. A very warm welcome to everyone tuning in today. So please allow me to introduce the AKEPT LTA platform, which stands for Let's Talk About. It was launched in May 2024 to facilitate discussions on leadership in higher education. Its key objectives include providing a space for leaders to share experiences, expand and address challenges such as technology integration and social changes, and expand networks across ASEAN countries. LTA offers practical guidance that leaders can apply in real-world settings. Its key impact is to ultimately contribute to building a more inclusive, competitive, and future-ready higher education sector. My name is Dr. Nur Hidayah Azman, and I am very honored to be your host for today's session. So before we begin, there are a few housekeeping tips that I need to remind everyone of. We are broadcasting live to you from the USIM TV YouTube channel. We are also on Facebook from AKEPT Malaysia's channel. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the live chat. Please tell us where you're coming from. And should you have any questions for our distinguished speakers, please post them in the chat box and we will address them during the Q&A sessions. And most importantly, do watch out for two forms. We do have a registration form and also a feedback form. So the links for both of these forms will be in the chat box. They will be posted in the chat box in a bit. And if you do need your certificates of attendance, please fill in both forms. So I repeat, if you want the certificate of attendance, please fill in both the registration and the feedback forms. The links will be in the chat box fairly soon. So I will introduce the panelists. We're moving on to the topic today, leading beyond traditions, disruptive leadership for the future of higher education. So today we are very privileged to be joined by a phenomenal lineup of distinguished panelists, each of whom brings deep expertise and insights from all corners of the globe. Our first speaker is Professor Sattar Bawani, Chief Executive Officer, Disruptive Leadership Institute, LLC from New York, DLI, and Professor of Practice in Disruptive Leadership, Asia E University. Our second speaker is Datuk Sri IR Dr. Zaini Ujang, Chairman of the Malaysian Qualifications Agency, MQA Council, and our third speaker is Ms. Azlina Kamal, Education Specialist for UNICEF. So we've got a fascinating lineup today, so let's take this opportunity to learn, exchange ideas, and imagine a bold future of leadership in higher education. So I am going to pass the floor to our moderator, so please allow me to introduce him. Professor IR Dr. Hafizal Muhammad is a professor at University Science Islam Malaysia. He is currently the director of USIM's Research and Innovation Management Center. He won the ASEAN Outstanding Scientist and Technologist Award in 2017. He has over 20 years of experience in ICT and academia, making significant contributions to wireless communications, holding 36 patents. He previously served as a senior researcher at Nimas Berhad, and he holds a PhD in electronic engineering from the University of Southampton and is a registered professional engineer and certified HRDF trainer. So without further ado, let us embark on today's journey. So I am very pleased to welcome Professor Hafizal to kick off today's session. So over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, MC Dr. Nur Hidayah, for welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hafizal, and I'm honored today to become moderator for this important AKEPT webinar session. It's truly my honor to guide today's conversation with three highly distinguished panelists and also impactful thought leaders in our areas. Each of them will bring a unique perspective to our AKEPT webinar session series number 3 in collaboration with Senior Head, and also Yuan Islam Malaysia USIM. Our theme today, Leading Beyond Tradition, Disruptive Leadership for the Future of Higher Education. Let me begin by briefly introducing our three panelists. Panelist number one, Prof. Sata Bawani is the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Disruptive Leadership Institute, LLC, New York, and also Professor of Practice in Disruptive Leadership, Asia E University, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He obtained professional doctorate in business management from European International University. Prior to his current post, he was the Managing Director, Executive Development Associate. He was also the Managing Director, Global Head for Transition Coaching Practice, DBM Asia Pacific, and also Head Global Information Services, Mercer Human Resource Consulting. Currently, he is involved in leading executive education and leadership transformation program at Disruptive Leadership Institute. He is developing and delivering MBA and executive programs in disruptive leadership with European International University, EIU Paris, and also advising multinational corporations on organizational transformation and C-suite coaching initiative. Prof. Sata is among the top 15 exceptional executive coaches globally recognized by CEO Weekly 2023 and top 10 best CEO for Singapore in Singapore by the CEO Inside Asia magazine. He authored multiple influential books in the Future Ready Leadership series. He is the recipient of the Executive of the Year Human Resources Consulting at SBR Management Excellence Award. Welcome, Prof. Sata Bawani, to our session today. Next, I will introduce panelist number two, Professor Datuk Sri and Senior Dr. Zaini Ujang. It's a great honor to welcome Yang Berbahagia Datuk Sri, one of the Malaysia's most distinguished and recognizable figures in higher education leadership in Malaysia. We are truly honored to have you today with us. Please be informed that due to prior commitment, Datuk Sri will be with us until 3 o'clock Malaysia time. We are very grateful for his presence and opportunity to benefit from his thought and insight during the session today. Let me provide a brief introduction to Datuk Sri's long and industrious career. Currently, Datuk Sri is the chairman of MQA. Today, he's on day 71 of his hashtag 100-day world lecture tour, day 71. Datuk Sri has written 52 books, more than 300 scientific papers, and more than 2,000 plus general articles. He owns 21 intellectual properties. He is the visiting professor at more than 10 universities worldwide, including Imperial College London, University of Leeds, Cranfield University, University of Tsukuba, the University of Tokyo, Kyoto University, MIT, etc. Datuk Sri was the Secretary General for 6 ministries from 2013 to 2025 for more than 12 years, very long career as Secretary General. He was the Vice Chancellor of University Technology Malaysia at the age of 43 and a Professor of Environmental Engineering since 2001. Datuk Sri also is the first recipient of the prestigious Merdeka Award for Outstanding Scholastic Achievement in 2009. More importantly, he was the chairman of the two important technical committees, Malaysia Higher Education Blueprint 2015-2025 and also Malaysia Higher Education Blueprint 2025-2035. Welcome, Datuk Sri Zaini Ujang. And our third panelist, would like to welcome Ms. Azlina Kamal, Education Specialist for UNICEF. As the Education Specialist of UNICEF and lead in Malaysia, Ms. Azlina provides strategic leadership and expert input into all UNICEF Malaysia education programs. Optimistic about people capacity to collaborate, she is interested in the development of context-driven, equity focus, child-centered intervention, embedded in inclusive strategies. She brings deep experience in building durable, impact-focused partnership and innovative programming in Malaysia, the Philippines, and Latin Americas and the Caribbean. Ms. Azina is interested in the development of politically and socially contextualized approaches to education leadership and programming social justice and policy development and engagement. She has provided thought leadership and participated in various discussions in the country, regionally, and at global events on various initiatives. In 2020, she was one of the 28 UNICEF staff globally nominated to be on the UNICEF task team on anti-racism and discrimination. Before joining UNICEF, Ms. Azlina worked in various capacities at the Ministry of Education in Malaysia. She graduated with distinction from University of Kent and the UCL Institute of Education London, specializing in education leadership and management. She was the recipient of the British Chevening Award. Welcome to all three panelists for our session today. So let me explain how the session will go on for today. So we'll begin with a series of questions, perhaps 2 or 3 rounds of questions for each panels, and followed by a moderated session Q&A at the end of the session after 1 hour session. So we welcome questions from all our participants at any time throughout our session today within this 1 hour, starting from now. After hearing inputs from our panelists, you may post your question directly on AKEPT Facebook or YouTube platform where you are watching this stream session currently being streamed live. Let me start with the first round of questions with panelist number 1, Prof. Sata Bawani. Prof. Sata Bawani, your work has centered on the idea of disruptive leadership and the necessity for agility and resilience in this time of uncertainty. So my first question to begin with, you have written extensively on the topic of disruptive leadership. What does disruptive leadership means in the context of higher education today? Perhaps you can begin the session by highlighting this, please.
Thank you, Prof. Hafizah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to everyone attending this session. First of all, thank you to AKEPT and Yusim for inviting me to speak at this very important topic, and timely, because I think it's time for higher education to look at how to reinvent. And since particularly during COVID, the last 5 years, we have seen a lot of transformation changes. So that's happening across all institutions, including business and also institution of higher learning. But to start off, let's be very clear. Let me define what is disruptive leadership. In my book, The Leadership in Disruptive Time in 2020 and the revised edition in 2023, I talk about disruptive leadership is a form of transformative leadership, which an approach that can be applied across organization, institutions, academic institutions, universities, non-profit, government, religious organization, to thrive amid the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and the disruptive environment, what together we call VUCAT, V-U-C-A-T, which is what we are experiencing today. But what exactly leaders do in a disruptive environment? One, they challenge the conventional norm. They are able to embrace innovation, experimentation, adopt critical thinking, and what we call cognitive readiness, and leading people through change and innovation with agility, empathy, and strategic foresight. And it's very important in the disruptive leadership to always put people before process and technology. So, in sum up, that is what disruptive leadership is. So if you look at the conventional leadership, the difference is here you are expected to disrupt your mental agility, what we call the uh, cognitive readiness, the ability to think your way of thinking. So it's a high level of thinking. Yeah. Now, in the context of the question is in the context of higher education. Let me give two specific examples. One is my client and in US, a university, Southern New Hampshire University or SNHU, where the context is about challenging the traditional models to embrace flexibility and agility. As I mentioned, here is where the university leaders, uh, from the president to the deans of the various schools, they question. This is very important. You question the rigid degree, structure, bureaucracy, inflexible policy to drive agile decision making. So rapid response to be able to ensure that you always have learner-centered pathway available. So in business, we call it customer centricity. Yeah, but in organization, in academic institution, we call it the learner centered. So, so that's one. And how they do it? How does the university do it? They develop the university business model, operative model based on an enhanced level of what we call disruptive leadership competency. And because of that, I think they, along with Arizona State University, is one of the largest online university in US. So if you wanted to know more about what is cognitive readiness, what is disruptive leadership competency, just go to my website. I make it all available free, disruptiveleadership.institute, where you can find all these models and studies. Second example regarding academic institutions in Singapore, one is in US. Let me pick one in Asia, in Singapore. The National University of Singapore is also one of my clients. And one of the success of NUS is that they are many. They are one of the top 50 in the world university in terms of the ranking. But what is interesting is that, of course, they are lifelong learners program where the university ensure that all the academic leaders, administrative staff, and faculty embrace innovation. And as the university, they reposition NUS as a lifelong learning institution by having hubs, global knowledge network, not just the traditional degree factory that we see in many universities, but they have a lot of collaboration with universities, Stanford, Tianjin, I mean, in China, university, and many other universities. Fortunate that the Singapore government provides funding through what we call the Skills Future program. So the Skills Future program funded by the Singapore government allow the university, they can tap on this funding to develop their academician, administrators, non-teaching faculty to embrace lifelong learning. And they offer what they call micro-credentialing, just like the Asia University, we have the micro-credentialing program. And they also provide flexible pathway to the staff towards, achieving recognized qualification. So let me. So in a nutshell, that's what disruptive leadership in the context of higher academic institution, with two examples: one in the US, one in Singapore. Over to you, Dr. Hafizah.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sataboni. So the first round, my intention is that to put everything, try to put in context with respect to your background. And the next panelist, number two, I would like to pose this question to the Dasri Zaini Ujang in the context of you have played a very important role in the crafting Malaysia Higher Education Blueprint as the chairman of the two technical committees for Malaysia Higher Education Blueprint 2015 to 2025 and also 2025 to 2035. How do you see the role of disruptive leadership or any leadership in the higher education play in realizing the long-term goal for this blueprint, Malaysia education blueprint. To Datuk Sri Zaini Ujang.
Okay, terima kasih. Thank you for this opportunity. Let me comment on the terminology first, because we don't use disruptive leaderships in the context of the blueprints. Despite we realize Professor Clay Christensen wrote a book on innovative universities about 15 years ago, and that is mirror after disruptive innovation, the book that he has written earlier. Am I okay? You able to listen me clearly?
We can hear you, but your audio is a bit intermittent in terms of the connections.
Yeah. Disruptive innovation started when Professor Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School come up with a theory that innovation that make expensive products and services more affordable and accessible. So, together with his former PhD supervisor, Tim Clark, he wrote a book on innovative university. So what we are discussing today actually is the book that written by both of them, Clay Christensen and Clark. And for information, you can download. If you go to Amazon, you can read about 80% of the books. So I think I would like to concentrate what the book is all about, because otherwise we are using his terminology, which is disruptive, and we are not respecting him as the founder of this management theory or strategy. So we have two types of universities. One, high quality, expensive, and high reputation. That would be the top 100 universities in the world. And then we have the want to be universities. They are not reputable, they are easy for students to enter, and they are cheap in terms of fees. So if you take that as two models available, how can the cheap university can be reputable? How can the cheap university can be of high quality? And to disrupt the first line of university, they are Harvard, MIT, NUS, and whatnot. So how can you disrupt them? So this is what I think we should be discussing from that angle, and then it's easier for us to use that disruptive leadership terminology. Otherwise, I think the topic should be changed, just leadership or creative leadership and something like that. But the day we use disruptive leadership, we have to honor the founder of this theory. And as a student of Clay Christensen, I attended his lecture since 2009 when I was at Harvard Business School, and I was his friend until his death recently. Let me tell you, when I look at it, at that time I was vice chancellor of university, I wanted very much to follow him. Therefore, I wrote a book then in 2012. The title of the book was New Academia. In that book, I tried to understand his theory and then try to emulate his theory in the form of what to do in universities such as the one in Malaysia. So first, we have to understand where we are at the moment, and then how can we get to that. And we know the two parameters that I mentioned earlier. One is reputation and quality. Second is very expensive. So in universities that we are going to do shouldn't be that expensive. Should be accessible to many students. Therefore, in his book, Innovative University, Clay Christensen mentioned clearly what is to be done. So I don't want to explain the book because otherwise this session will be a book review. But I really encourage everyone here to read his book, and his book is available on the net, and then we can understand the whole thing. So when we started developing both blueprint for higher education Malaysia in 2015, the first one, and then recently we completed 2025 to 2035. The prominent items is not only leadership. Yeah, we have to have a bigger picture. So therefore, when I ask who are the attendees of this, if the attendees of this event are higher level in leaderships of university, I think we have to think very seriously where to get good students. Yeah, to get good students is not easy now because students have a lot of choices and there are a lot of universities available. So to attract good students is a skill. The second point is to get committed staff. So I think leadership is no longer options. It's no longer what we are doing by rotation in university at the moment. AKEPT should play a role to train professional academic leaders, at least at faculty and at the university level. We should be professional in the sense that you are no longer doing your research, you are no longer doing it teaching when you reach that level. So I've seen quite a number of people when on my tours, for example, Vice Chancellor Harriet Watt University, he is not a professor, but we know, but he is a professional a leader in higher education, and despite they were very excellent. They are top teachers, top researchers in the field in the past, but the moment they assume that the assignment or position as a dean or pro vice chancellor or vice chancellor, they no longer doing the research. Yeah, they get full time working on that, and the assessment for promotion, assessment for their key performance indicators are solidly on corporate leadership instead of what we are doing in Malaysia. Sometimes in Malaysia we are having problems. They are doing corporate works, but at the same time, their promotion based on their research, their promotion based on their student numbers and whatnot. So I think it should be identified very clearly. And the third point, I'm having internet problems here. In case I cannot enter again, I strongly believe that this discussion should be followed through, and I think we should read both blueprints that we have already made public, except for the second one. I think it still need time for the Cabinet of Malaysia to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Datuk Sri, giving your perspective on these disruptive innovations from the context of the books by Clay Christensen, and also earlier that Prof. Sata mentioned about some of the example in NUS. I would like to bring the third question to Ms. Azlina as the third panelist, sharing in the context of what you are doing with UNICEF. Could you share with us some of the UNICEF insight and future megatrends and potential disruption impacting children, and how it may impact higher education in the future? Because I think the coming generations, I think with the things that happening in the world, things are changing. So perhaps you can give a perspective and context from where you see things are moving. Please.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you so much, Professor Hafizal. I hope I'm being, the sound is okay, yeah, my end? Yeah, great. So thank you so much for really inviting me today to talk a little bit about, thinking about disruptive leadership or reimagining education and higher education. I thought about what might be useful for the audience today, and we have experts in both the professors before me. So I thought what I would do today is to present a series of provocations and possibilities, right? So as we continue to discuss, to explore, to look at reimagining education, and disruptive leadership for the future. And I will share these series of provocations in the spirit of this quote from my favorite philosopher, Michel Foucault. He says that my point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So his position, or mine as well here today, leads not to apathy or paralysis, but to a hyperactivism. And the ethical political choice we have to make every day is to determine which is the main danger. So that's the spirit with which I will be sharing some of the thinking and the context of the work that I've been doing with UNICEF. Now, what do we know about trends before I go into my series of occasions? Is that last year, UNICEF, we did a State of the World's Children report. We do this every year. And last year, we outlined several scenarios to paint a picture on what childhood would look like in 2050 or could look like. It focuses on 3 mega trends. And the 3 are the climate crisis, disruptive technologies, and demographic change. So it looks at how projections on these mega trends may converge to impact where and how children live, including data on education, poverty, health, and how we look at, I think Professor Sapta earlier talked about a youth, but this one we're talking about a youth-inspired pathways, which is the same, right, to a more equitable, sustainable future. And we know that these mega trends will have an impact on teaching and learning in terms of widening access and participation, in terms of quality and equity, and in terms of renegotiating change and all these disruptions that have been discussed. And how do we then, negotiate the entire teaching and learning space? So what I thought I would also do is also to contextualize the discussion around what we know and what the data is telling us. So if we look at challenges in global education, even before COVID, there was already a learning crisis, right? So we had, more than 260 million children who were not in school, right? And even when children were in school, 38% of them were not learning the basics in English, in reading and mathematics. And we knew that 1 in 2 children with disabilities were not accessing schooling. In low-income countries, 90% of adolescents in the poorest quintile have never attended or have dropped out or are still in primary school. And even in high-income countries, we know that this is like about 40% of them, right? Then we also have issues related to youth unemployment. Globally, we have 71 million youth who are unemployed. In Asia Pacific, we're looking at about 33 million, which is about the entire population of Malaysia. In terms of the working poor, we know that globally we have 159 million globally and 83 million of the working poor in Asia Pacific. So we know that the situation was already dire even before COVID. After COVID, we know that COVID has exacerbated the global learning crisis. There are lots of learning losses and inequities, right? In Malaysia, for example, we're looking at only 42% of our 10-year-olds who are able to read a simple sentence, for example, right? And with all these disruptions globally, up to 1.6 billion learners globally, 1.3 billion without access to learning at home. We know only 24% globally had access to internet channels, for example. Schools remain closed for 168 million children for an entire year. So these are all the different issues that we know when it comes to learning. 2/3 of the academic year average learning loss is estimated at 10 to 17 trillion US dollar for this cohort of students, right? So there is an enormous learning loss, but we also know there are the risk of children not coming back to school, girls who are, at risk of child marriage, for example, children who live in income poor households being more directly impacted, and also the likelihood of engaging in child labor, for example. So there is a bit of a learning emergency, and how do we look at programmatic shifts in education? So we know there are multifaceted challenges, but we also know we have a once in a generation opportunity to transform education system. And like some of the things that we also note is that I've mentioned this earlier, the most marginalized would have been the most affected as a result of the pandemic. But I think it's also important to highlight that the marginalized are not a homogeneous group. There are layers and levels of marginalization, right? So I think so what does this mean for us in terms of reimagining the future or reimagining spaces within which we are working in, is to really look at an intersectional approach in terms of a multiple deprivation analysis. So it's not good enough to say, if we're thinking about, a child who is poor, has disability, lives in rural area. So we need to look at the different deprivation that a particular child or our young people are going through, right? So, and then to tailor these impact challenges and interventions. So for example, a child with disability to a refugee child, to all these different groups of learners, right? These would be different. And I think oftentimes as well, we have children who don't fit within the mainstream. How are we looking at, for example, skills development? There is a very legacy approach to skills development, for example, and young people now are looking at, very quick, very agile way of learning and acquiring skills. So what would this mean in terms of how we organize learning? So again, this whole multiple modalities and pathways of learning we've discovered is going to be really important. Looking at high tech, low tech, looking at children who are out of school or who will not be able to access traditional models of learning and education. And I think when we design for the most marginalized group, it will work for everybody, right? Usually in terms of designing any kind of programs, we do it for the most privileged, and then we think about, how do we fit in the most marginalized? But then I think it's also really important to say, to turn it and say, if it's going to work for the most marginalized, it will basically work for everybody. The other thing is also very quickly for us to really focus on interventions, right? So there is a feeling that, okay, as we're moving forward, we need to think of new things that we need to, activities or initiatives that we need to work on. But and there is also this issue of transplanting business principles into education, especially in higher education, looking at effectiveness, looking at scores. But I think it's also important to step back and think about how education is not a commodity, and not everything we want to achieve in business and education is incompatible. And then there are intersections, of course, but then the logic of business can be incompatible with the logic of education and social justice. So like Foucault says, there are dangers and trade-offs, and I think we need to be clear about what these are and what are these ethical political choices we are making. And I think I know I don't want to take too much time with just one question, but I think there is, how do we move to a more developmental model that looks at effectiveness, strategic value, sustainability, and scalability. My last point really, when we talk about innovation, and I think we all use the word, like we talk about transformation, we talk about innovation, we talk about leapfrogging. There is a sense that there's going to be like a magic pill or a silver bullet or a panacea, right? But as we explore the adjacent possible, I think it's important to be cognizant of the fact that pathways to change is not straightforward. It is not fast or immediate. It takes time, and sometimes it is not necessarily for better, or that it necessarily contributes to learning, right? So I think thinking about innovation in really more meaningful ways for learning and how we organize that, I think would be really important moving forward. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Azlina, for your thought on that. Since we have the constraint of time that I mentioned earlier, that Sri has to leave shortly, I will pose the second and the last question to Dr. Sri before I move again back to Prof. Sata for the second round of the discussion. So Dr. Sri, you mentioned earlier about your book about new academia and your experience previously as the Vice Chancellor, as a leader in higher education. So perhaps you could give some advice to young academics or young leaders who will emerge as a future leader in higher education in Malaysia. What are the things that they should be wary of? What are the challenges and opportunities that they should prepare for? Dr. Sri.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, but the line here is not very clear. I hope you can listen to me. I'm so sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Also, videos are not as advisable. Otherwise, my data will be finished very soon. Okay, I want to repeat two things. When we talk about disruptive in the context of my discussion, this is a proactive strategy. It's not a survival strategy. Disruptive innovation, as discussed by Clay Christensen, is a very positive thing. It's not defensive. We are not saying that because of the COVID, we have to be able to see the situation in different manner. No, without COVID, without anything, we have to be disruptive in innovation. And what we are trying to do, as I mentioned, there are two models. One, high quality, high cost versus low quality, low cost corporate strategy for universities. So I'm talking from that perspective, and I'm talking about survival strategies. Okay. In this context, if you read the book again, not only new academia that I've mentioned, it's not only new academia. I've written about 5 books related to this strategy. New academia, then later I wrote about the soul of higher learning and whatnot. So that's all evolves around disruptive innovation. So the question is, how can we provide high education, quality education at decent cost? It's not 50,000 USD per year for student. It can be done by, say, for example, 5,000 ringgit, 10,000 ringgit. So disruptive leaders must think what best that we can provide. How can we do research, not 1 billion ringgit, 1 billion Sing dollar research, but we get the same quality? So this is the question that we have to ask ourselves if we want to look leadership in the context of disruptive innovation. So therefore, I think this is a serious matter. Therefore, I strongly encourage AKEPT to look into this very seriously. In the past, since I was Secretary General in charge of higher education, the head of AKEPT reported to me. So we discussed about this quite lengthy. But it is time now for AKEPT to be a professional body. AKEPT should be a center to train leaders in higher education. They get chartered status. They get fellow status. They are no longer dividing the time between leadership and being a researcher. It's a serious matter. This is what happening in many universities in the world now. Professor at Harvard, the president of Harvard University, he didn't call himself professor in certain field. He called himself, I'm a president of Harvard University. MIT, you don't call him professor in the field because he's no longer there in the field. He just concentrate himself managing the university. So if you read the book by Craig Christensen on innovative university, that's what he's discussing. And if you have time, you can read New Academia book that published by UTM Press. Okay, I give you an example. In order to become good in leadership, we have to understand the ecosystem of New Academia. At the moment, this is what Professor Shattar mentioned earlier. Therefore, people like Professor Shattar being invited to become adjunct professor in university. In the past, adjunct professor is unheard of. When I was a student, there were, seldom we listen to outsiders. Professors will say that this is my territory. No one can enter my territory. I'm the one who is responsible. But now it's common for everyone. I'm here. I can next week I'm going to Boston, and then I have time to discuss not only with professors but also with the student in class. This is very interesting. The connotation, the faculty members are only full-time is no longer valid now. Many universities that I know, they rely so much on part-timers, and this is what we call experiential learning. They want people who are on the ground themselves to teach students. If we are talking about leaders in higher education, we get professional leaders themselves to teach, because they can give you a better insight. In terms of learning materials, we are no longer talking about tangible knowledge in books, journals, and internet. What we are talking about tacit knowledge. So how can we get tacit knowledge unless you have time, experience in the job market, in where you are, in the subject that you're preaching about. And this is where we get what we call as wisdom. So to be a leader in this ecosystem, new ecosystem, we need professional leaders. I cannot say what are the criteria of the leader that required, but in the blueprint that we completed recently, the leaders that we require are the leaders that can speak the language of our stakeholders. What are the stakeholders going to be? This is different compared to the past. When we talk about stakeholders in the past, we were talking about government, we are talking about funding agencies, we are talking about parents, we are talking about students themselves. Stakeholders that are now growing in the market are learners. They come to university to learn. Therefore, top universities such as MIT, Harvard, and one, it's easy for you to get in. You can go to their portal, you can go to their e-learning, so you can get their certification. Unlike in the past where they have a barrier, no one can enter our universities. Only the select few, the chosen people can enter the university. But this is the situation that we have to understand. So in order to prepare ourselves in that leadership position, I think we cannot do it part-time. I know as a former vice chancellor, some deans, some head of departments, they take leadership as part-time, and they were persuaded to become leaders because they are rotation. They are the most senior in the team. They should take that responsibility at least for 2 years. We don't want this type of leaders. We want leaders that we groom, and we know that they have all the criteria. And this is moving forward, I think, the role of AKEPT to ensure that the position of Malaysian higher education, and I have to say that I can go around in Europe meeting president of universities from Norway to Netherlands along the journey of 52 days in Europe. I can see that they respect Malaysia so much. In fact, after meetings with a group of people, when I deliver lectures, they ask me for one-to-one discussion, how best they can improve the universities. So this is happening in many ways. I'm not saying that world university ranking are these so indicator or parameters for quality, but that shows a lot. Top 200 universities in the world, 5 from Malaysia. The rest are all from what is our competitors close to us: Switzerland, Sweden, France. These are countries with 5 top university in top 200 yeah, based on the recent ranking. So they look at us differently. We are not small players. We are really a serious contributor to higher education. And they were asking how you produce leaders. Our leaders are not committed. They come to head faculty, and they don't have time to lead because they have the research funding that they have to oblige to complete and to deliver. So these are things that I finally decided myself in particular the day I entered the position of top leadership. I'm not saying that I completely discharge my responsibility as researcher, but I'm no longer asking for research fund, no longer do things that people can evaluate me from research perspective. Whatever I've done is between the year 1995 to the year 2000. That's it. 2010 is only 15 years of active research participation. The rest are history. Yeah. So if you do it correctly, you will get some results, good results, and you continue moving forward. Yeah. So this is my message. I'm so sorry I have to leave. If you want to contact me, please send to me. If you want the book, New Academia, Soul of Higher Learning, some of them are available on the net. If you look into our blueprint, 2015, 2025, it's already in the internet many years ago, and there are playbooks how to create leaders, how to train leaders are all there. Yeah, I don't want to repeat because this is available for you to read. I'm so sorry, Mr. Chairman, I have to leave.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sri, again for your time, your thought, and your presence here today. So I think one of the key points that I can summarize from your explanation is that we need a serious and committed leaders who are very sincere for our higher educations in universities. All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Sri, and then we'll continue the second round of the discussion with Prof. Sata and later Ms. Azlina. Okay, as mentioned by Dr. Sri Zaini, I think Prof. Sata also is a living proof evidence of the practitioner who have a wealth of experience in the industry, and he is giving lectures and also impart his knowledge and wisdom to universities also. So you mentioned earlier on, so Prof. Sata, some example in NUS. What are the other things perhaps you can share with us? Some of Malaysian university or Southeast Asian university can learn from other university globally, or perhaps I will pose another question for you also. What are the leaders in the senior who have senior leadership role in the university administrator that must adopt to thrive in the challenging VUCA scenario? So there are two questions. It depends how you're going to take it. So please, Prof. Sata.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hafizal. I think the question about leadership behavior, first of all, I enjoyed listening to Dr. Sri earlier. I think what is important to understand, he's talking about disruptive innovation for the institutions, for the organization. So the topic of today, as we see on the screen there, is about disruptive leadership. So disruptive leadership need to embrace disruptive innovation as a way of leading the organization. So that's very important about Clayton Christensen. In my books, I make reference extensively to Clayton's work, and also other thought leaders. Only Clayton is not the only one. Professor Clayton, the late, he's the late Professor Clayton Christensen. But I think what is important, there are, since then there are extensive research, been embarked upon by various institutions worldwide to look at what leaders need to demonstrate to be able to thrive and survive in this VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and disruptive. Especially since year 2000, when we look at the emergence of the digital-driven environment, and how, of course, then we look at the importance of what we call the disruptive technology, disruptive innovative technology that has, with the Industry 4.0 or IR 4.0 or Industry 4.0, which Klaus Schwab from WEF, World Economic Forum, termed it a fourth industrial revolution. So the WEF has published extensively every year the leadership skills, behaviors that need to be demonstrated in preparing for future, the disruptive workplace. So let me give you number one, the most important in my research over the last 20 years is what we call need to demonstrate cognitive readiness. What is cognitive readiness? Is the advanced level of critical thinking, not strategic thinking, not innovative thinking, not creative thinking, but critical thinking. Is a huge difference, and many people tend to use it interchangeably. They are not. So when you talk about critical thinking, the ability to discern between fact and fiction, ability to look at the information and make informed decision, and how you challenge your mental model by having a disruptive mental agility. So number one, for not only administrator, it applies to even institutional leaders, faculty, all members of the institution has to demonstrate the cognitive readiness. So all my books and the extracts are available on the website free of charge. So all of you can go into disruptiveleadership.institute. I've given all the extract, all the models, all the research, they even free white papers you can download if you want to know more. What is important, that's number one. You need to have that cognitive readiness is a confluence of a combination of critical thinking, emotional, social intelligence, and adversity quotient, ability to connect the dots, having ability to demonstrate high-level experimentation, resilience, rapid response in responding to challenges outside, inside the workplace or the business environment, and so forth. So that's one. Now, second, I think what leaders need to do is to be able, let me go into specific, into higher education or universities. Not only the administrator, I think the question was targeted at university administrator, but I want to say that everyone, including from the vice chancellor to the deans, to the HOD, to the faculty members, lecturers, tutors, everyone need to demonstrate cognitive readiness and embrace flexibility and agility. And agility, not only the disruptive mental agility I talk about, the agility, the change agility, the what we call the results agility, to be able to drive, have the sense of optimism to drive for success, and they need to challenge. And one of the and this is something very sad in Asia when I travel worldwide. Even in Russia, when I give lecture in Russia, in Moscow, in France or London, anywhere in the world, I found that Asians traditionally don't challenge the rigid degree of structure and bureaucracy. So that's number one. You need to challenge the bureaucracy, and even if the policy are inflexible, challenge and provide alternative view, and that will lead to agile decision making. So, but to be able to achieve that, you need to disrupt your mental model, your disruptive mental agility. A good example is Arizona State University in the US. They are ranked consistently the most innovative university in the US, and also some research, some studies shows worldwide. They use AI tutors, AR, VR lab, adaptive courseware. So there are various what we call learner-centered, disruptive technology, which allow them to become one of the best online university. Second example would be the Stanford D Schools, part of Stanford University in California, where the design thinking is part of, they're the pioneer in design thinking. And design thinking is, what makes Apple, what makes Microsoft, Google, and many other technology company, even Coca-Cola, Boeing, very successful because of the customer centric approach in terms of designing product and solutions and services for the target market, and that requires the skill, or what we call entrepreneurial mindset. And this is a challenge that we face. Many universities today you cannot find this. Apart from Stanford, MIT, Harvard, and most of the US university or Oxford, I work with many universities. I found that many of them are rather happy to stick to what they know best. So some of them have the biggest problem is the lack of self-awareness, and or they have what we call the biggest challenge is what we call knowing, doing, get. They know, they read, they have access with technology. You can read, and on various platforms, you get access to all the knowledge. But that's not important. And what are you going to do with knowledge is to execute, to put in practice. That is what is required. That's what we call a knowledge, doing, get. So that is a challenge. The behavior needs to change at all levels in the university. And we're talking about entrepreneurial mindset. One of the things that you need to be able is to be able to encourage experimentation, new ideas. Sometimes I look at university, as a professor of practice at a young university, many universities over the last 25 years. I was sit on the board advisor of Curtin University in Australia, and other universities in Australia, in China, and in Europe. One of the biggest challenges I find that most of the professors, the senior faculty, they tend to stick to what they know best, what they used to, and they resist change. So you need one of the behavior of a successful disruptive leader. The behavior is to be able to become a change leader, what we call a catalyst, to be able to help the various members of the organization, the staff. So I got many examples, and in my book, Leadership in Disruptive Time, the crisis, the making of crisis leader. In 2020, I wrote during COVID in China. I wrote a book called The Leadership Disruptive Time, talking about the challenges leaders face, and give example like Jessica Ardern. One of the most successful leader I've studied is Jessica Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, who thrived during COVID. Excellent, great communicator, empathy. From a business perspective, I think Satya Nadella from Microsoft, excellent. Again, empathetic listening, demonstrating emotional and social intelligence. So this is what university administrator, faculty, everyone needs to demonstrate. So just to sum up, I think what is important today, you need to ask yourself 3 questions. You need to really examine, have a sense of introspection, self-reflection, where you are in terms of those skills, and then you need to acknowledge that you do not know what you do not know. Or the third situation is, yes, you know what to do. The question is, what are you going to do next to close the knowing, doing gap? So there are a lot of examples I'm giving away in my website. Go and have a look, disruptiveleadership.institute in New York, and you can download the white papers and all the case studies and all the examples I've given you, and hope they will help you to at least stir start having the dialogue within the institution organization. And let me know if you want to have a dialogue, and I'll be happy. I travel to Asia very frequent every month. I'm in Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, India, China, Australia, and Japan and Korea because of client work that I do. So I'll be delighted to speak further to any of the university in AKEPT network who wants to know more. So thank you, Dr. Hafizah.
Thank you again, Prof. Sata. Very good points, starting from cognitive readiness, agility, entrepreneurship mindset, and also having AQ is very important as other intelligent quotient. All right. So we have about 15 minutes before we end. But before we take the question again, those who are listening to our live streaming, you can post question in YouTube or in the Facebook Live. I will post the last question to Ms. Azlina as a way forward, maybe from UNICEF perspective, and then Prof. Sata will wait for the question from the audience after this. Okay, Ms. Azlina, as we contemplate for the future of higher educations, what does the international organizations such as UNICEF can bring to the higher education table that can add value to universities to thrive for the next decade?
Thank you very much. I think, I also wanted to, think about it in terms of, because I think Datuk Sri mentioned a very good point earlier, right? There are two disruptions that we're looking at. One, we are looking at how can we look at the disruptive innovation, disruptive leadership, which is a positive, which is like, what Prof. Sata was talking about, that is really very dynamic, right? So that is one of the, one aspect of the disruption we're talking about today. The other part is, and I talked about this when I was highlighting the context, the disruptions globally in terms of learning, in terms of what young people are going through with all the threats. So there are two levels of disruptions. One in a very positive dynamic sense, but the other in terms of context and all the different changes that children and young people are going through. I think that distinction, I think, is also important, and I'm talking about both, right? So I know Dr. Sri was talking about the more positive part of it, but I also wanted to contextualize it within all the changes that are taking place. So an organization like UNICEF, what we do really is, we look at all sorts of ways in terms of data, in terms of research, in terms of, system strengthening. We looked at models for scale, community engagement, innovations for learning, the whole range of experience when it comes to learning, education, and reimagining this education for children in a world that is constantly also changing and moving forward, right? So I think the best way probably to answer the question is to really maybe present a series of questions in terms of what I've just talked about, right? So when we're talking about and as part of this disruptive mental agility that Prof was talking about as well. So the first question, I think, in terms of equity and access, I think as leaders, right, or transformational leaders or disruptive leaders, I think that an important question to consider is who benefits from all these changes in higher education and who is being left behind. So again, right, the levels of disruption. There's a disruption in all these changes, positive things that are happening, but also who is then not having access. I think that is really important because there can be this rigor in terms of moving forward. We're going to do this, we're going to achieve this, and that's fantastic. But I also think, leaders need to think about who is being left behind and why, and what are those mental agility or innovations that we can think of so that they can be part of that positive disruptions in higher education. So, all these approaches to inclusive innovation, and there are lots of examples in all the countries we work in, looking at multiple modalities of mobile learning, localized different things that we've done in UNICEF, right? So I think the key point to make is that disruption must be equity driven. How do we ensure education innovations are inclusive, especially for the most underserved? Because I think essentially innovation without access, all these positive disruptions without access, is just exclusion by another name. The second, I think, is in terms of young people's agency and participation. The question to consider really are young people, university students, are they recipients of this change, this positive disruption, or are they co-leaders in shaping it, right? So I think in terms of all this engagement in governance, in innovation, that is meaningful and not tokenistic, and how are we looking at creation of spaces for this to take place? So they're not just, young people are not just the future, they're also the present, right? And so how do we disrupt top-down models and truly embed young people's voices in terms of how universities evolve in the future? The third is, I think, thinking about local relevance and global connection. We've heard examples earlier. I think, how does or how can higher education balance global competitiveness with local relevance? And also, I think with globalization, we challenging, certain models and rankings, for example, right? How are we looking at investments in more contextualized learning, research, and partnerships rather than this whole borrowing maybe from the global north to the global south? I think there is a need to also reimagine this, question this a bit more, and I think Professor Sata talked about a certain criticality, right? That is this true disruptive leadership that localizes innovation, making it relevant to real world communities, and how can university be a bridge for that? The other is on, I think, this whole idea of digital transformation that is ethical, that is inclusive, and that is also safe, right? So how can we look at, UNICEF, we've worked a lot on principles on ethical tech. We're looking at AI. We are also aware of all these different biases. So how do we negotiate all this in a really meaningful, effective way? So, for UNICEF, we don't just advocate for tech, but we want tech that is not only scalable, but also inclusive and also rights-based. So I think universities have the unique ability to lead with ethical foresight, not just digital speed, right? So, and I think the last bit maybe is also to consider, are universities measuring success? How are universities measuring success? Are we looking at rankings? Are we looking at impact on people and the planet? And how can it be better aligned with, say, the Sustainable Development Goals? And how are we reframing institutional KPIs around equity, around employability, and around community impact, right? And to not, I think, to not be driven solely by this whole idea of managerialism and new public management, which can be effective to a certain extent, but I think we need to redefine what this disruptive leadership can look like, right? And how it redefines success, not just by prestige, but also by purpose. And I think higher education should definitely be a force for equity and not just for excellence. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much again, Ms. Azlina, talking about inclusivity, equity, agency and participation, local relevance and global connections. Those are very important issues to be addressed. Okay, Nate help from my colleague here. So we're going to pick up some of the question from the audience, and then we'll post the question in the screen. All right. So from Hayati Ismail, thank you to the esteemed panels. One question: who is supposed to identify leaders who are willing to take challenges, since many are quite resistant to change and apply transformative change? Perhaps I'll pass this to Prof. Sata.
Okay. Okay. This is a very important question, not only in academic institution, but in private sector as well. The question people always, or the point that's been made, that it is a role of HR to be able to identify, assess, and develop leaders for future role, or to take on in transformational role. But I disagree. In the last 30 years, in as an OD, HR, change management specialist, and HRM, HRD, resource management, human resource development, and executive coaching, I believe the primary responsibility is that of the line manager. In other words, the person that's responsible, or the reporting officer, not HR. HR is only the enabler. They will facilitate, help provide the resources, the infrastructure, the instrument, the tools. But is the manager has a responsibility? For example, the chancellor should take the responsibility to assess his leadership team, and then we should then we have the dean of each school should take responsibility to assess his leadership team, because they are the one who knows best what is required for the role of their team members, and probably they have already been through that, so they understand. Second is important because they have the day-to-day interaction. They can provide support. They can use coaching methodology, create an environment, what we call the organizational climate. People are willing to, embrace and accept this. So you cannot just push it to the administration, to HR. No, it's the line manager who should be responsible. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Sata,
Maybe
for
I'll
your
come
thought. Yes, please.
Yeah, maybe I'll come in a little bit to add as well. I think that's a really great point in terms of thinking about organizational leadership. But I also, since we also have lots of, young people, perhaps university students, lecturers in the audience, I also think, we also need to deconstruct notions of leadership. That leadership, to be a lead learner, what would that mean in all our different contexts, right? So that while we also know that people can exercise leadership when they are in positions where they had, like, Prof. Sata talked about, and these are really important as well for those who are in these positions to also enact all this, disruptive innovation and mental agility, criticality, etc. But I also think, as we are deconstructing leadership, I think it's also important to think about, where are those spaces for change and leadership for learning that we can all take on, regardless of whether we have the position to come along with it, right? I think looking at a more distributed leadership where people are looking at it as a skill and competency that we are developing across the organization, I think that would also be another perspective that I wanted to add.
Yeah, can I just, Dr. Hafiza, the question also talk about the other part, the questionnaire was asking about resistance to change. So this is an emotional aspect. It's very important to understand dealing people. And this is where a trust-based partnership has to be established. So as a leader, a disruptive leader, a good example is Satya Nadella from Microsoft. Why is he able to transform Microsoft, from number 3 to number 1, at one stage the most highly valued company with a 3 trillion market cap, is based on what they call empathetic leadership, is to understand and even people who are resistant to change, help them to understand, provide the emotional support, coach them, guide them, inspire them, provide them the resources. And of course, you can do it once, twice, the third time, then after that, you need to really ask yourself, are they the right person for the role, for the job? Sometimes people doesn't fit anymore. So you need to ask yourself, it's time to change. But to be that, you need to demonstrate both organizational justice and procedural justice. What do I mean by organizational justice? You must be fair to the person, everyone in the organization. So you must be fair. You cannot pick on people. Second is procedural justice is how you conduct the conversation, a coaching conversation in a fair, manner, so that people really see you truly, a leader who care for them. So lead with love, not lead with fear. So this is very important. Use a different situational leadership. By Daniel Goleman, the father of EI or EEQ, talk about how you can use different leadership style. So change is tough. As the saying goes, you can bring a horse to the water, but you cannot force the horse to drink the water. So you need to inspire, you need to build rapport, help them to understand, and then hopefully people will change. So sorry, I just wanted to add to that point about change management, especially in disruptive leadership. Change agility is one of the competency in my research that we talk about the highly successful disruptive leader. They, including Sundar Pichai, including Jeannie Rodney for IBM, and many other leaders I can talk about who has been very successful in transforming their organization. Thank you.
Thank you again, Prosata and Ms. Azlina, for your thought, because the question has two parts. Yeah, that's correct. Maybe we have one more time for one more question. So Hazlinda Abdullah, looking ahead to 2030, what will be the biggest disruptor in higher education? How should leaders respond? Yeah, any of you, Prosata or Ms. Azlina, to take this question?
Sure. I'm happy to go ahead. I think some of the points I brought about earlier, I think these are important. I think, I think times are changing very fast. I think technological advancement outpace education reform. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest disruptor. Either you want to think about it positively or not. I think that is something that we can inspect a bit more. So and I think there's a lot of research really that shows the value of technology in education and also probably in higher education, I would imagine, right? That there is an overemphasis on the technology and not the learning, right? So there is always, we need to do this, we need to have this, but to what extent really are we effectively enhancing learning? I think that is something that we need to be a bit more critical about. And I also think I want to go back to the point that Prof was talking about change, right? I think there can be different things that will present itself. And I've talked about all the trends earlier with, climate change, with disruptions to learning, with potential of shocks to the education system in future, right? Whether it's higher education or education. I think how we bring people on board will be really important. While I do agree that all leaders need to build their capacity and be really proactive and dynamic, and as I talk about this in terms of all this distributed leadership, I also think we need to move away from this superhero model of leadership, right? That there is one person who's going to come. While that is also important, I think bringing people on board with that whole change process, I think that will really influence the entire sustainability of the change process. And I think, I think Datuk Sri was talking about, right? Like not everybody knows everything about everything. And I think in a more globalized and complex world, I think being able to kind of draw on this different expertise in terms of all this moving together with different people and components of society, I think that will become increasingly more important. But I also think another point really for us to consider, I think Malaysia, we are moving, we are an aging country, for example. There are going to be shifts in labor market dynamics, for example. I think these are also things that we need to think about, right? And this is why I talk a lot about inclusion. It is really a lost economic opportunity if we don't really get not just different people, different experts on board, but all different groups of learners, especially the most marginalized. So I think if you ask me, I am for inclusive disruption. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Ms. Lina. Last thought from you, Professor, before we end.
I think Ms. Azlina has put it very well. I mean, well said. I think one is the disruptive innovation technology. Second is the demographic shift, the aging population. All these are major trend, major disruptors. I talk in my book, the leadership in disruptive time, the revised 2023, where I talk about 6 major disruptions, including other disruptions. I'm not going to go into that, but I want to comment, build upon what Azlina has said. I think the most important is the over-reliance on technology. It's important. It's important to acknowledge disruptive, innovative technology like Gen AI, ChatGPT. You have seen the impact in education, and you have seen the challenges the headache that it caused. Recently was in the news, even in Singapore, the National Technology University, there was a case where the lecturer assigned an assignment, and the lecturer clearly make it known not to rely on the chat GPT or a similar tool. Yet the student did that, and there was a lot of about dispute and so forth. So I think technology is there. So I think we need to acknowledge, but as leaders, what is important, because the question is, what should leaders respond now? I think Hazlina, the question is asking, what should you do now? I think now you need to understand the PPT concept. Again, my website, you can get it free, you can read up. People before process and technology. Remember something very important. Technology is only an enabler. It's important to understand the disruptor. It's a major disruptor, but it's the people. You need to change the behavior of the student, the people, how they can use technology to make it more productive for the day-to-day work, how they can help them to be a better learner, how they can be a better leader. But they should always focus on the people before the process and technology, number one. Number two, because of Gen AI, actually there will be another biggest headache in 5 years' time. Actually, the questionnaire was right. In 2030, China is poised, based on the research I've done in my published, that China is, both America and China are racing, both, to be who will be the first to develop the what we call the AGI, artificial general intelligence. Basically, it's the highest form of AI where it can think, decide, and it's dangerous in the wartime. There were instances where I've seen, if that happened, the danger, because you can have machines that can decide and take action. Even in a war, the recent war between Israel and Iran and the US intervention, and you just imagine if they rely on a machine or a GAI who make decide where to bomb, when to bomb. So the human aspect is missing. So it is very important to remember that you cannot replace that, the empathetic, the human relationship, the trust. So that's why I'm saying, what should you do now? Hazlina is asking the question. Now, leaders should now start organization, institution, university. AKEPT has a very important role. How do you transform the leaders in the public universities and help them to prepare for the future? And to do that, start with the VC, the DVC, and downward. Everyone And the VC is not excluded, because you have to start with the top leadership, embrace the disruptive leadership competencies that I talk about in my website. You can get more information, and then you drill down even to the students, to the various stakeholders. And I think I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic because, but I'm also have a sense of optimism grounded to reality. In other words, a lot of people know what I'm talking about. It's not new, but it's about knowing, doing gap. So I'm very sad to conclude by saying this, that many of the university administrator institutions that I go around, the knowing, doing gap is the biggest challenge, and what we call the blind spot, the derailer. They know they need to do it, but hey, why should I do it? I'm going to retire in 5 years, or I'm going to retire soon. Let the younger, members of the team to get on. No, you should embrace, lead, and provide the environment. You should be the coach, the guide, a mentor, inspire. This is something which is lacking in the educational institution worldwide. I'm not showing in Malaysia, I'm talking about worldwide. There are very few. Of course, the younger one, the Gen Y faculty, administrator, they are more adept to all this new technology. But the traditionalists are have retired. The Gen X faculty, administrator, they are retiring. The boomers and traditionalists are gone. The Gen X are started to retire. In the next 5 to 10 years, the Gen Y will be in senior leadership position. So you start there. You still need to invest in development. So let me just end there, Dr. Hafizal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Satta, and also Ms. Azlina, for your thought and also inputs that you have provided for today, and also not forgetting that Sri Taini Ujang, who was together with us earlier on. Thanks also to all the participants who are watching this online, and also those who will be watching this in the future. We appreciate again our panelists, Prof. Satta Bawani, Dr. Sri Zani Ujang, and Ms. Azlina. So we hope the wisdom, information that you have provided can bridge the gap between knowing and doing, as mentioned by Prof. Satta. This is also very important. Otherwise, we may know things, but we don't do it properly, so we may not change as we wish. So I'll pass over to MC to close the session. Thank you very much again, panelists.
All right, thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our webinar for today. So many thanks to our moderator, Professor IR, Dr. Hafizal Muhammad. Thank you to our esteemed panelist, Professor Satta Bawani, calling in from Jakarta today. We had Datuk Sri IR, Dr. Zaini Ujang, calling in from London just now. And then we also have Ms. Azlina Kamal from Malaysia. That was a particularly incredible Q&A session. So lively, so spirited. That was amazing. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. So to conclude today's inspiring discussions, let us carry forward this reminder by Peter Drucker, who said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is the act. It is to act with yesterday's logic." So in a world that is constantly moving, staying ahead of the curve means staying in the game. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to AKEPT. Thank you to Yusim, Simia Raihead, our distinguished panelists, and all of you, members of the global academic community, for sharing your time and energy with us today. So a final reminder, please don't forget to sign both of our forms. We do have a registration form and a feedback form. So if you fill in both forms, we will give you a certificate of attendance. So don't forget to do that. So ladies and gentlemen, be bold, be trailblazing. Disruptive leadership is all about making your mark and for all the right reasons. So take care, everyone. See you in our next session of the AKEPT Let's Talk About webinar series. I'm Dr. Nur Hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and goodbye.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you. Bye-bye.